Ms. Bennett. The interview partner's voice sounded strangely far away. I tightened my fingers around the leather portfolio on my lap and tried to focus on him. Why commercial litigation? I knew the answer. I'd practiced it 20 times that morning. But the fluorescent lights above the conference table suddenly stretched into white streaks. I'm interested in. The floor tilted. The next thing I knew, I was staring at the ceiling with a receptionist crouched beside me. Don't move, the paramedics are coming. My face burned. This was the interview that could finally change everything, and I had collapsed in the middle of it. A paramedic checked my blood pressure and asked, "When did you last eat?" I looked away. Yesterday afternoon. The truth was worse than the answer sounded. I wasn't dieting. I wasn't too nervous to eat. I was broke. My name is Mimi Bennett. I was 27, fresh out of law school, buried under education expenses, bar prep costs, rent, and credit card debt. That morning, my checking account had exactly $43. I'd spent the last money I could spare having my interview suit professionally cleaned because my mother, Diane, had looked at it 2 days earlier and said, "If you want people to take you seriously, at least look successful." So I did. I just couldn't afford breakfast afterward. At urgent care, I finally called my dad. Richard arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his work jacket. He stopped beside my chair. "You passed out because you hadn't eaten." "I'm fine." "No, Mimi. You're 27 years old and skipping meals before job interviews. What is going on?" I stared at my hands. Rent is due. Bar prep cost more than I expected. My cards are nearly maxed out. I thought if I got this job, I could finally catch up. Dad slowly sat beside me. "Why didn't you tell us it was this bad?" I almost laughed. "Mom told me I needed to stop expecting family to rescue me." His eyebrows pulled together. Then he said something that made me forget about the IV taped to my arm. "Why didn't you use your trust fund?" I turned toward him. "My what?" Dad went completely still. "Your trust fund." "What trust fund?" The color drained from his face. He explained that my grandfather had established trusts for both Vanessa and me before he died. Mine had originally been funded with $500,000. Mom had been overseeing distributions while I was younger, with control eventually transferring to me. Dad had assumed I knew. He'd assumed I had been using it for school. "I have student loans," I whispered. "Dad, I've never received $1 from any trust." He immediately called Mom. No answer. I called. Nothing. Then my phone vibrated. "Mom." But it wasn't a call. "Stop dragging your father into things you don't understand." Dad read it over my shoulder. His jaw tightened. "Give me the phone." He called her again and left a message. "Deanne, I want the trust records, all of them." My phone buzzed again minutes later. This time, I read Mom's message twice. "You're no longer family if you freeze that account." I slowly raised my eyes to Dad. I never said anything about freezing it. He stared at the screen. Neither had he. Which meant Mom wasn't afraid of me discovering the trust. She was afraid of what would happen if I stopped the money from moving. Dad drove me home from urgent care, but instead of leaving, he walked straight past the kitchen. "Come with me." He disappeared into the small office he and Mom had shared for years and crouched beside an old metal filing cabinet. "What are you looking for?" "Your grandfather's estate documents." He pulled out folders until one thick envelope landed on the desk. Dad opened it. There. I leaned closer. My full legal name was printed on the page. Mimi Bennett, beneficiary. Initial funding, $500,000. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. $500,000. I thought about the $1,800 I'd needed for bar preparation. I'd called Mom asking whether she could loan me part of it. Her answer came back instantly. You're an adult now, Mimi. Adults solve their own problems. So I put it on a credit card. Meanwhile, Vanessa flew home for Christmas in upgraded seats, carried designer handbags, and posted pictures from expensive resorts. Whenever anyone asked how she afforded everything, she smiled. Mom helped a little. I'd assumed that meant Mom's money. My hands shook as I called her again. This time, she answered. What do you want? I'm looking at the trust documents. Silence. Mom, where's my money? Oh, please, that trust paid for your education. No, it didn't. I have student loans. Another pause. Then her explanation changed. There were family expenses over the years, things that benefited everyone. Everyone. Mimi, families don't keep score like accountants. This isn't keeping score. Grandpa left that money to me. Her voice hardened. There it is. You find out there's money and suddenly you're greedy. Dad reached for the phone. I held up my hand. I needed one answer. How much is left? Nothing. Mom. Still nothing. Dad took the phone. Diane, send us the latest statement. She hung up. That night, I went through every page until I found the financial institution administering the trust. I called the number. After verifying my identity, the representative explained that detailed records couldn't be released during that call. But because you've reached the required age, she added, you can request a temporary restriction on non-essential distributions while ownership and account activity are reviewed. I looked at Dad. Then I thought about collapsing on that law firm floor because I couldn't afford breakfast. Do it. The restriction went into effect. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. Mom, you have no idea what you just did. I stared at those words. But for the first time in years, Mom wasn't deciding what happened to my money. I was. 2 days after I froze the trust, I walked into my parents' annual holiday dinner and knew immediately that Mom had gotten there first. Conversation stopped. My aunt looked down at her plate. One cousin gave me an awkward half-smile before suddenly becoming fascinated by his drink. Mom stood near the dining table, as if nothing had happened. There she is. Her voice was sweet enough to fool anyone who hadn't read her texts. Vanessa sat beside the Christmas tree with wrapped presents stacked around her chair. New handbag, expensive watch, perfect hair. Then Mom sighed dramatically. I suppose we should address this before Mimi ruins the entire evening. Deanne, Dad warned. No, Richard. Everyone should know why there's suddenly a family crisis. Mimi discovered she has an inheritance, and now apparently I'm a thief. Several heads turned toward me. I felt 12 years old again, Vanessa shining while I stood there defending myself. Then Vanessa laughed. Mimi, seriously, you've always been jealous because I actually built a successful life. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to perform for them. Wait. Dad's voice stopped me. He placed a folder on the dining table. I received preliminary records. Mom's expression changed. Dad opened the folder. Mimi read this one. I looked down. Withdrawal, $14,800. Purpose, beneficiary holiday expense. I checked the date. My stomach tightened. That Christmas, I was working temporary document review shifts. Dad looked at Mom. So, where did $14,800 go? It covered holiday expenses, Mom said quickly. The entire family benefited. I didn't. Vanessa shifted in her chair. Then she looked at the date. That was probably Cabo. Silence. Mom snapped toward her. Vanessa. What? Vanessa frowned. You paid for Cabo that Christmas, me and Eric. My aunt slowly lowered her fork. I stared at my sister. You went to Cabo with money from my trust. Vanessa's smile disappeared. I didn't know it was your money. And And I wasn't even invited. Mom pushed back from the table. This is exactly why financial matters should remain private. Dad ignored her. Mimi, keep reading. I turned the page. More withdrawals. $3,200. $7,900. $11,400. Several dates lined up almost perfectly with Vanessa's expensive holiday trips and purchases. Then I reached the final pages. The pattern changed. The withdrawals became closer together. Larger. Faster. And almost all of them had happened during the previous 12 months. I looked across the table at Mom. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She was watching the folder. Whatever she had been doing with my money, she had suddenly started doing much more of it. And I needed to know why. 3 days later, Vanessa called me. Not to apologize. Not to explain Cabo. She was furious. What exactly did you do to that account? I moved the phone away from my ear. I restricted distributions. Well, undo it. I actually laughed. Why? Because Mom promised to pay my credit card balance after Christmas. I stopped walking. How much? That's not your business. If she was planning to pay it from my trust, it absolutely is. Vanessa went quiet. Then she said, there's also a deposit due for the family vacation. There it was. Mom hadn't just taken money years ago. She was still spending it. And freezing the account had interrupted whatever she planned to take next. I ended the call and made an appointment with an independent trusts and estates attorney. I brought every document Dad had recovered. She spent nearly an hour reading before tapping one section of my grandfather's trust agreement. This matters. What does it say? Your mother's discretionary authority narrows once you reach 27. After that, control begins shifting directly to you. I stared at the page. I turned 27 this year. Exactly. Suddenly, those recent withdrawals made sense. Mom had known the clock was running out. My attorney formally requested the complete accounting. As records began arriving, we matched transactions against dates. Christmas rentals. Vanessa's flights. Shopping purchases. Transfers into accounts that had nothing to do with me. Then I found one date I recognized instantly. My final year of law school. I remembered sitting on my apartment floor, calling Mom because I was short on rent. Please, I said, I just need help getting through this month. Her response had been cold. There is no safety net, Mimi. 3 days after that conversation, my trust showed a $9,600 withdrawal. I opened Vanessa's old social media posts. There she was that same week, smiling beside a fireplace at an expensive mountain resort. Caption, Mom always makes Christmas magical. I turned my laptop toward Dad. He stared at the picture, then at the bank statement. I'm calling her. He gave Mom one final chance. Explain this before attorneys take over. Mom didn't call. Instead, she sent me a long message accusing me of turning bookkeeping decisions into a family scandal. I forwarded it to my attorney. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Mimi. It was her. Her voice was different. We received the complete accounting. I sat down. How bad is it? She paused. Mimi, this wasn't occasional borrowing. I gripped the phone tighter. We've calculated the total. How much? My attorney didn't soften it. Approximately $287,000. I said nothing. She continued. That's the amount withdrawn or redirected from the original $500,000 that we cannot legitimately connect to your benefit. I stared at the wall. $287,000. While I had borrowed for law school. While I had put bar prep expenses on a credit card. While I had counted $43 in my checking account and chosen between breakfast and looking presentable for a law interview. My attorney walked me through the accounting. Some withdrawals had covered legitimate shared expenses, but substantial amounts had gone toward Vanessa's credit card payments, luxury trips, holiday accommodations, gifts, shopping, and other expenses that had nothing to do with me. Mom had repeatedly categorized transactions as benefiting me or the family beneficiary. The recent withdrawals were especially revealing. She knew her discretionary authority was narrowing now that I was 27. She knew control was moving toward me. So the money had started disappearing faster. The following week, Dad and I sat across from Mom with my attorney present. Mom folded her arms. I never stole anything. My attorney placed the accounting on the table. Mom barely looked at it. That money stayed within the family. I pulled one statement from the stack. The $9,600 withdrawal. Do you remember this date? Mom glanced down. No. I do. I slid the statement toward her. That was 3 days after I called you because I couldn't cover rent. Her eyes shifted away. You told me there was no safety net. Mamie. 3 days later, you took $9,600 from my trust while Vanessa was at that mountain resort. Mom pressed her lips together. I leaned forward. Where was the family when I needed this? She had no answer. Dad looked at her as if he were seeing someone he didn't recognize. How long did you think this could continue? I was helping Vanessa. With Mimi's money. Vanessa needed support. I stared at her. And I did. Mom looked down. For once, there was no lecture about responsibility. No accusation that I lacked independence. Just silence. Vanessa learned the full truth soon afterward. When she saw the records, her confidence disappeared. Mom told me it came from investments, she said. You never wondered why she could suddenly afford all of it. Vanessa swallowed. I knew she was helping me. I didn't know she was taking it from you. That didn't erase the years she had spent using those holidays and purchases as proof that she was more successful than me. But it answered one question. Mom had deceived both of us about where the money came from. Mom wanted to settle everything privately with an apology. I refused. You told me I was no longer family because I stopped you from accessing my own money. An apology doesn't fix that. My attorney formally challenged the unauthorized distributions. Faced with the records and the possibility of prolonged litigation, Mom eventually agreed to a financial settlement. Improperly distributed funds would be restored through liquidated investments, assets under her control, and a structured repayment arrangement. She permanently lost every bit of authority she had over my trust. The remaining funds were placed under independent administration until they transferred fully to me according to my grandfather's instructions. Dad also removed himself from the financial arrangement Mom had controlled for years. One evening, he came to my apartment carrying another box of records. I should have checked. I didn't answer immediately. He put the box down. I assumed your mother was handling everything correctly. I assumed you knew about the trust. Those assumptions cost you. He didn't ask me to forgive him. That mattered. I'm not ready to pretend everything is okay, I said. I know. It was the first honest conversation we'd had about his part in what happened. Vanessa had consequences too. Once the accounting established which transfers had directly benefited her, she sold several expensive purchases and began repaying money she had received. The glamorous family holidays stopped. So did the luxury trips Mom had made look effortless. Without my trust quietly financing the image disappeared. My own life changed differently. The law firm contacted me after my collapse. Once they understood that it had been a medical incident rather than anything involving my professional ability, they offered me another interview. This time, I woke early. I ate breakfast, A real breakfast. I put on the same suit Mom had told me I needed to look successful. But when I walked into that conference room again, I wasn't thinking about her. The same partner sat across from me. He smiled. "Ms. Bennett, shall we try this again?" I smiled back. "Absolutely." When he asked why I wanted to practice commercial litigation, the room didn't tilt. I answered. And weeks later, I received the offer. Over the following months, restored funds from my grandfather's trust helped me eliminate high-interest debt and establish the stability he had intended for me. I didn't buy designer bags. I didn't book luxury vacations. I made sure I would never again have to skip a meal before walking into a room where my future could change. I kept one document from everything that happened. The original trust statement. Mimi Bennett, beneficiary. $500,000. It stayed inside my desk at my new office. Not because the number mattered most. Because for years, Mom had convinced me that struggling alone was proof of character, while secretly using the safety net my grandfather created for me to support the daughter she favored. The day I froze that account, Mom told me I was no longer family. She meant it as punishment. Instead, it became the moment I finally stopped letting her decide what I deserved.